We have a couple different types of molds that you can use in the studio. The one that I'm going to show you right now are tube molds. And we've got various sizes of tubes. Most of them are from PVC pipes, like this. This one is a cardboard tube. So tubes can be used for building blocks to build a sculpture. They could be used maybe to make the start of a cup or a pitcher or something utilitarian. So they can be very useful. So I'm going to start by preparing my slab. So I rolled this slab out on the slab roller, and now I need to compress it and erase the canvas texture. Anytime that we have texture on something that's not intentional, we want to get rid of it. So I use my metal rib and the rounded side of it and compress. And I use the rounded side because the flat side has corners on it, and these corners will leave scratch marks in your clay. So I use the round side, compress it, erase that canvas texture, and then I'm going to carefully flip it over. Anytime I use slabs, I want to be careful when I'm flipping it or carrying it. I don't want to put a crease in it, like a bend, because that can remain in my clay and always sort of be present. If when you're compressing over your clay, you see little bumps come to the surface, which are little air bubbles, like I see one here, I just pierce over it and then erase it, and that can erase that bump. Usually those bumps won't cause a problem, but they can be a blemish on the surface that you might not want to see. So I compress my slab, smooth it out, get rid of that texture. Then I'm going to just cut a quick rectangular shape. So I can move through this demonstration at a good pace here. So I use my ruler. This clay should immediately go back in your bag so it doesn't dry out. Keeps it nice and workable. Back in my bag. Then I've got this rectangular shape. I can take a damp sponge. Don't want it to be soaking wet. You don't want to add too much moisture to your clay because it can cause it to break back down. So it's certainly not dripping, but if I want, I can sort of smooth over these edges right now. This is going to be much longer than I need, so I'm not going to worry about these edges too much yet. And then I'm going to use this tube. So I need to put something in between the tube and the clay. Otherwise, it will stick. The clay will stick to the tube and it won't come off. So scrap paper. I generally have a folder up at the table that says scrap paper. And this will not fit all the way around. So I'm going to tape two together. If you don't have scrap paper, and I'm not here, you can use paper towels. Tape this together, and we have tape in the studio, usually on the back wall or on the bulletin board. And then I'm going to wrap this around. And again, take a little piece of tape to hold this on. And I want this paper to be fairly loose. I don't want it to be snug to this tube. So I've got this taped on, and now I'm going to take my tube, make sure the paper's at the bottom, not up here. I don't want to see any of the pipe exposed. And I line my tube up, bottom of my tube with the bottom of my slab. And I start to roll it around. At some point, I'm going to get to the start, and I'm going to cut. And I've cut it so there's a little bit of an overlap, and that's what I'm going to use to slip and score. So I'm now going to take my needle tool, scratch really well. The last thing you want to do is construct a whole sculpture out of tubes and spheres and cubes or maybe multiple tubes, and then realize the very first part that you joined, you didn't slip and score together, and it falls apart. So slipping and scoring successfully is critical. So I'm going to line this with slip, and then I'm going to fold it over. And I have a decision to make. Do I want to just tidy this up and see the seam, or do I want to erase the seam? The seam is something you definitely need to think about. So generally, I would say people like to erase the seam. That's up to you. But I would sit here and blend it in and start to erase it. And while this tube is underneath it and it's supported by the tube, I can bang on this. I can blend it in pretty aggressively. Once the tube is out, I can't do that. So I want to do as much cleanup as possible. Sometimes I'll bring in my rubber rib and sort of go along the seam like this and start to blend it in well. But with a little bit of time and attention to detail, you can erase that seam. So I'd spend another minute or two doing that. And then when I think I'm good, I'm going to decide, do I want to have a floor on this tube, or do I want it to be hollow? Do I like the idea of that negative space? Otherwise, I'm going to grab another slab that I rolled out, compress this, and this one, you can see there's some inconsistencies in that slab. I'm not too worried about that because I'm not going to use over there. This is a slab that I rolled out by hand. Do what? Once I've compressed it, smoothed out the texture, I'm going to carefully pick this up, put it on my base, and then trim out my base. And generally, I trim out about 1/4 of an inch larger of a base. You'll see why in a moment. Not too much bigger. Take this away. This goes back in my bag. And now I'm going to carefully pick this up, and I'm going to slip and score. This up. Slip and score. I could also use my serrated rib, which gets it done even quicker. We also have forks that are kind of similar to the serrated rib that get it done quicker. Once I've scored both parts, I'm going to put my slip on. My slip is the glue that's going to hold these together. So I don't want to be timid about my slip usage or my scoring. Carefully pick this up, line it up so I've got about a 1/4 inch around. I give it a little bit of a shimmy down. And then this extra clay that I left, the 1/4 inch, I can use as my reinforcing coil, basically. Because generally when we join two pieces of clay, like in the cube video, I reinforce that seam with a coil. So this extra clay, that extra 1/4 inch, allows me to just push it up, and I don't have to roll out a coil to reinforce that seam. So I use this. I can spend a lot of time blending this in. Doesn't take too much time though, but now is the time to blend it in and erase it before I pull the tube out, because I can push up against this without problem because the tube's underneath it. So I can use a rib, blend this in. I can do all sorts of stuff while the support is underneath it. Once I've blended it in as best that I want, I can then give a little twist, pull my tube out. Because of the paper, it releases, and then crumple up my paper and pull this out. And now I have a tube, and I can decide, do I want to make a top for it? which I'd have to be a little bit more careful because I don't have the support of the tube underneath. Do I like it being open? And you don't have to leave it tubular. I could all of a sudden start to play with it and start to play with the shape. This could just give me a starting point to begin a shape. I could use a rib on the inside and start to use the round part of a rubber rib and kind of add a little bit of a rounded shape to this. This could even be the starting point for a teapot where I belly it out. And a banding wheel would be helpful for this, so I could gently move it. But, just because you start with the tube doesn't mean it has to stay a tube. So we've got tubes of different sizes. I could stack different tubes on top of each other, play with the idea of balance, have negative space, all sorts of things, but it doesn't have to remain tubular. Once you're done with this, wrap it in plastic, obviously, at the end of the day, so it can stay nice and moist so you can continue to work on it the next time. Main thing to remember, there's always got to be paper in between, otherwise it's not going to release. And also an important thing to remember is this is a one-day thing. You cannot wrap this with clay and then say, oh, I've run out of time, and stick it on your shelf and not pull the tube out. Because even under plastic, the clay starts to shrink. And if it shrinks on this surface, when you come back a day or 2 or 3 days later, it will have shrunk and cracked, and it won't remove itself from the tube. So it's a one-day activity, timing-wise. Wrap it with clay, pull the tube off.